I think that's a convenient narrative for the Trump administration, which is why I doubt it. It's true that war on Iran has been a career goal for Netanyahu, and so he's been trying to get the U.S. to like lead the charge on Iran for a very long time. He's not the only one, by the way. Like his rivals and have also had their targets on Iran and have done military operations in Iran, and so it's not only Netanyahu. Like, but maybe that's not entirely relevant. And yeah, what I would say is that this is a Trump decision to suggest that Israel can force the U.S. to do anything is it's magical thinking. It's like, yes, like Israel is influential. Yes, the Israel lobby exists. Yes, it is also an influential arm of Zionism as a political force. No, it does not force the U.S. administrations into like existential battles or like battles with existential consequences. I think once again, I'm cautious. Like I'm not a fucking talking head media commentator. I try to say what I say based on like actual research, and typically the stuff isn't available to me right now. Like it's like we're speaking as this is unfolding. By the time, it's changing as we're speaking. By the time we'll post it, it will change. It will change some more. So it's hard within the fog of war to understand what exactly is happening, who exactly is behind the scenes, what are the exact motivations. From my vantage point, with a very limited access that we have as people who don't sit and behind these closed doors, it seems like Trump is just continuing this kinetic rampage through the world as a distraction from the Epstein files. It might sound too simplistic an explanation. It probably is. There are obviously other interests. There are very important economic interests. The U.S. would definitely want to control like oil in Iran and the strategic control over the Straits of Hormuz, in the same way that the U.S. wants to control 20% of the world's oil in Venezuela. But to embark on such a like militarily deficient campaign, at least that's how it looks like right now, takes more than like it's more than just those interests. It's this hubris that I was talking about earlier, and also the sense that Trump shares with Netanyahu, that you have to stay kinetic because of like the very personal legal risks that you're facing if you lose power. Okay, welcome to the Revcast, which is the name of my soon to maybe exist podcast. And here I'm posting the first installment, I guess, which is an interview with Spooky Scary Socialist, and it was first published on their Patreon for free. And I encourage you to check out their Patreon and their incredible YouTube channel. And I'm uploading the full interview here as well. And welcome to my second channel on YouTube. Or if you're listening to this on Patreon, thank you so much for supporting me. I'm including a special little token of appreciation for you at the end of this interview on my Patreon for patrons only. Really appreciate you. Shout out to you. Here's the interview.
But yeah, no, I'm surprised like you show your face for some of the materials you put out, especially like the GGU, Gaza Ghetto Uprising video. Like really one of the most fantastic pieces of YouTube media that I've seen in a long time.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I started putting my face out there because that was basically the media that I was gravitating towards. So I wanted to put something that I would watch. Like I wasn't watching Sean as much as I was watching talking heads rambling at me, So I was like, at some point I was like, well, I don't give a fuck. I just need to get this message out there, and that's more important than than my privacy in the sense. So we'll see. Maybe you'll be vindicated with your, adorable animations. But I decided to take the risk and put my face out there.
No, I mean, it's great because animation takes a long time. Each video takes like at least a couple months.
Oh my God, my videos take more than that. Much more than a couple of months.
I'd love to begin by talking about what I think is probably what you're most well known for, which is the Gaza Ghetto Uprising, both sort of in text form and it's also uploaded as a video essay on YouTube. So I just want to say the first time I watched it, I just had my I feel like my worldview was really shifted, not only because of the way you extensively cite Fanon and these radical decolonial thinkers, but also the way you connect it with the Palestinian resistance, and not only speaking in sort of abstractions, but also connecting it to sort of the on the ground operation, sort of citing sources both among the Israelis and among Palestinians, and sort of the extensive way you use sources, practical video footage you found online. I just found the analysis really deeply compelling, both in military theory, both in terms of concrete narrative. And I want to sort of begin this interview by asking you, how did you come to make that video essay, and what sort of pushed you to publish this online for everyone?
Yeah, good question. I guess, well, so I've been trying to experiment with YouTube video essays for a little while longer than just GGU. GGU was sort of, I guess, my breakout video, the Gaza Ghetto Uprising. But and if you want, I can tell you the full story.
Yeah, sounds great. I mean, you could even start with like what got you into making YouTube content in the first place.
Cool. Yeah, because yeah, that's the starting in the beginning, I suppose, to answer your question. So I was going to start a grad school program, a PhD program, and I decided that I didn't want to write boring academic articles that no one would read, or that 55 academics would read behind a paywall. And I noticed that there was this sort of emerging ecosystem of media where young people were forming their worldviews from video essays. And so I decided to like try and intervene in the sphere, because I wasn't seeing my politics really represented in that. But I was seeing people making like really like deep, complex, well-researched media that allowed them to kind of say everything. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's what I found the most inspiring, was like I could make videos that are hours long, and more people will watch them than like read them in article format. And I could say everything I have to say, and maybe also even like intervene in discourse. I started just kind of giving it a shot with like the earlier videos on my channel. And then when October 7 happened, it was like, okay, I need to take myself more seriously. I need to really put my head down and work on saying the things that aren't being said right now by anyone, let alone video essayists. Yeah, and so I like started working on that frantically, basically, and it took me 9 months. It would have taken a lot longer if I wasn't working with like an insane person, like if I was working on my normal pace, basically. And I'm not totally satisfied with the result. Like I think I did the best with what I could, like with no budget, and with the time, with like other obligations. Like I wish I had better sound. I wish I had better editing. But yeah, the analysis itself, I'm glad that I was able to say everything I had to say. That I didn't couch it. I didn't self-censor. I was like, this is worth taking a risk for. This is worth putting out there. And my worst fear was that it would be censored. Was that like I've worked so hard and then it just immediately gets nuked. But yeah, I mean, I guess to my surprise, it wasn't censored. To some other people's surprise as well, I suppose. And it's out there. And now I feel like I actually, it was picked up by the algorithm. It was picked up by some other creators too, like some journalists, some academics. Andreas Malm was like stoked about the Gaza Ghetto Uprising. Abby Martin. So it made its way sort of outside of YouTube too. So that's really encouraging as well. And now I feel like now I have a platform. Now I have a place from which to like work and share research and analysis that can like intervene in discourse. So I may have not stopped the genocide, but like I feel honored to be part of a media landscape that supports the Palestinian resistance and is committed to using media to stop the genocide and free Palestine and inshallah enact a revolution in our lifetime. So yeah, I don't know, that's the short answer to your question. Tell me if that responds. If not, I can try again.
No, that was an absolutely great response. I mean, I can definitely tell that you have an academic background because you're very sort of like thorough in your sources, both in terms of like theoretical and practical sources, as well as, just the breadth of sources, I think really made and pushed the video essay like to fantastic levels. Like once again, like you were looking at sources that no one else really had in terms of like Israeli sources, like podcasts, just your discussion and breadth of military knowledge of military theory. I definitely think the video, I mean, you said it wasn't a perfect video essay, but I really think it's like up there. Like in terms of like my personal thoughts, I think it's like top 10, top five interviews. Top 6, 7.
Top six. Okay, what are the other five?
I don't know. I'd have to think about it. Well, obviously, all of my videos.
Well, yeah, yours are fire. It's true. Yeah.
You were also talking a lot about risk, and I've also had to navigate that in terms of like I've made my own video on the Palestinian resistance and Hamas specifically. I've also had to like navigate being banned for a few days. So I get what you're talking about in terms of risk.
Cool. Yeah. What started you on YouTube?
Oh yeah. So I mean, it was pretty similar to what you were saying. I just felt like I needed a creative outlet. I started YouTube. This will probably be on the Patreon only, on the full version, because I don't know if I want to give my whole background. But I started YouTube when I was very young. I just needed like a little creative outlet. I've always loved making videos, and I just thought the bread tube sphere wasn't as radical as it could be. It was sort of like skirting around this idea of like economics, of radical politics, and sort of only doing like media analysis from, you know, a vaguely left wing, vaguely progressive lens. And so I just started doing YouTube both as a way to express myself creatively, which is sort of what I think I get a lot out of the animation, but also as a way to express politics that I hadn't really seen expressed online before. And like the thing with existing communist YouTube at the time is that like I started around like 8 years ago. And then I took a break for like, you know, school and college and things like that. That got me on and off in terms of posting. But the thing with existing sort of left wing communist YouTube that actually does talk about politics and economics is it's a bit boring. You know, it's a bit dry. It's usually just a guy talking to his webcam or like, you know, a slideshow, PowerPoint presentation. And that's fine. I mean, I still watch a lot of those videos, but I felt that a lot of the existing sort of left-wing, radical left content was a bit dry. And so I thought an intervention that was more entertaining, more comedic, more pretty to look at would be good, a good intervention into that sphere. And also, you know, I mean, it's like what you said before, right? I want to make videos that I personally would watch and would be excited to watch.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, your shit is fire. It's so funny. It's like, that's I think that's the key. It's like that's where what we do is actually better than academia, and like I mean, it's better than academia in many ways, but it's also like it's entertaining in addition to like being well researched and like committed to speaking the truth. You know what I mean? That's something you do really well, and I would want to steal all that shit from you, like steal the knowledge. You know, how to make animations, and your humor is really good. Yeah, I really appreciate your content.
I'm not the best, but yeah, I mean, like I told you this before in private, but like, you know, if I weren't doing YouTube, I'd probably be like pursuing grad school or higher education. And while I do love sort of the process of researching, the process of like teaching and learning, I do think there's a lack of creativity, I think, in grad school or in sort of academia in general, where you can't be as creative or maybe even as entertaining or humorous. And I think humor is really important to sort of get a message out there, even if it's political. And there's, of course, like challenges with navigating, you know, how serious do I want to be when I'm talking about, you know, deadly serious topics, and you know, is my humor punching up or is it punching down? So there's all those like tough considerations and like really balancing out information and entertainment. You know, I try my best to navigate that tightrope, and hopefully you know, hopefully I'm doing better.
What I was able to do was like carve space for myself in academia by doing my stuff, and it's definitely a struggle. It's hard to defend my time, but I think for stuff like yours, I mean, I don't know, I'm not trying to tell you to go to grad school, but like there is a world, or like there are academic programs that understand that academia is like a sinking ship, and that if it wants to stay relevant to the times, it needs to allow people to make their, you know, to make their research accessible in other formats, and to do that, people should be allowed to like write video essays as their dissertations, or like make animations as their dissertations. And so I'm just saying that that world, you know, even if you decide like in 10 years you don't want to keep relying on like YouTube ads to like get your bread, then you could probably pivot back into it. if you want. Not that I'm recommending it, but
No,
like,
like you were saying, right? Grad school is looking like a tougher and tougher option, especially with the latest administration's attacks on higher education. Like not just the humanities, but like everywhere in the United States has gotten pretty rough.
yeah, and academia is full of cowards too. It's like it's even worse than YouTube in some ways. Yeah, people are afraid of saying the truth. Like the consequences of you saying the truth in an academic article are pretty slim. Like no one is gonna read that shit. Like just say the fucking truth. Just say what you believe. But anyway, that's a different fight. I'm trying to not pick.
No, I think I mentioned it at the end of my video on Hamas is like as useful as scholarly sources are in terms of like studying the resistance in Palestine, they also have their limits. Like I mentioned, like a lot of decolonial scholars have just like completely flopped after October 7th in terms of like, I mean, on the one hand, they could just maintain silence. But on the other hand, you see like a lot of them just like bowing to the pressure and just straight up condemning the Palestinian resistance when the option of just remaining silent or even just taking a more measured academic having a more measured academic comment was on the table, but a lot of them just completely folded after October 7th, which
Yeah.
was a little disappointing, well, very disappointing.
Yeah, anyone who's condemning the resistance should know we're keeping tabs. We know who you are.
But all right, so going beyond academia, so something I was really interested in hearing in your latest video, What Do, is you mentioned your the Gaza Ghetto uprising had some screenings in real life, and that you were sort of there to like comment and like answer questions that people had. How did those screenings go, and like what was the reception people had generally?
They were great. I mean, that's what feels so good about it. Is like is when you go out of your own hellhole of like production and editing all by yourself and take it out to the world and like interact with people IRL. And so yeah, I was fortunate. I was able to do a whole tour. I went to California. I went to New York. I went to France. I got to see people's responses in real time to see whether the jokes are landing. So it felt very much like, oh, I'm like a filmmaker touring a documentary that I produced with almost no budget, and or that's at least how people were treating it out in the world. Because you meet people who don't watch things on YouTube if you tour it, so you meet a lot less people, right? The view count from IRL screenings is a lot lower, but it's really worthwhile in terms of the conversations it creates and also the new audiences you meet. So I'd recommend it for you as well if you wanted to. I can help with that. It would be easier with your work because my shit is just so long. So I'm doing it right now with What Do. Like I screened it in Minneapolis, and that went well. But I had to only screen an hour of it because it's 3 hours long, and we had 2 hours for the space. So you sort of so now I'm sort of giving people a taste, and then getting their input, and actually filmed the last one. So I might post it on my second channel, like the discussion section. There's so much I have to do, so I just need to figure it out timing wise, like when to edit that shit. I really need to hire someone. That's a different conversation, I suppose. In order to actually maintain my channel and like get other people to support with editing and stuff like that. So the stuff comes out. But yeah, I definitely recommend screening in IRL.
That is something I've been thinking about a lot. So I'll definitely follow up with you in terms of like IRL screenings or like whether touring is a viable option for my videos. I just think my videos exist better in an online space. I think like trying to show it in an IRL space would be a bit confusing because of how saturated it is with internet humor. But I'll definitely follow up with that.
For sure. And don't sell yourself short. Like people watch documentaries that are so much more boring than the stuff that you make. I would encourage you to put yourself out there, but it's up to you. Obviously there are some risks involved with you like not showing your face, but then yeah, so then with comrades it can be like a closed screening or stuff like that. And I think your content like should influence conversations in such spaces. Part of why I was excited to talk to you is that I come from a more sort of insurrecto background, but from a space that I think can learn from sort of more socialist Marxist discourse. And I was excited to bring both of these backgrounds together and to learn from each other. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And speaking of politics and screening, I'd like to move on a little bit to sort of your most recent video essay, the 3 hour long behemoth, What Do. In the video essay, you talk a little bit about what pushed you to make it, which was like an email. But if you could like elaborate a bit on that here, how did you go from GGU to What Do? And what would you say is like the big takeaway from the video?
Yeah, well, 3 hour video, it's hard to distill it into one takeaway. But yeah, so the title of this video is What Do, but it's also Gaza is the Compass. And eventually, so I think if I ever put it out in written form, which is what I did with GGU as well, and I actually did it before I published like a version of the script as an essay before I published the video, just because I finished it first and I was like, this needs to go out there. And then it took me a few months to finish the video after that. If I were to publish this in written form, and I will eventually, I just don't know if it will, if it will be a book with GGU or something. But yeah, it will be sort of What Do, Gaza is the Compass, or something like that. I'm not sure yet. And it's an organizational thesis more than anything for me. So it fills out some thoughts that I wasn't able to fully explore in GGU, but also it picks up from the broad analysis and theory of GGU and goes down to, okay, what can we do? Like, how do we actually change the world? How do we actually stop a genocide? How do we actually make a revolution happen? So in that sense, thesis 5 is the thesis that most responds to that question and like poses a path forward in terms of, okay, here are first like baby steps for how to start a revolutionary organization based on my research and sort of specific to the U.S. context. Although it might be you might be able to translate some of this to other contexts. And so what I pose is that yes, like we are in the U.S. context, but also and like this is what we can do, but also Gaza is the compass. Like also like there is a key in the Palestinian resistance to how to make revolution happen here, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with this idea that Gaza is the compass. I think October 7th really shook the world and showed that like even in the most direst of conditions under, a decades long blockade that's been sort of strangling the Palestinian people, that, resistance is still possible. And that, I think in an era that's increasingly, I would say desperate, increasingly barbarous, that resistance is still possible and that the Palestinian resistance has really sort of shined a light in that direction, and that sort of it's our duty as people who are committed to liberation to sort of study that resistance and not just to like be cheerleaders on the sidelines, but to find ways to implement a project of liberation in our own context. And that's what I really sort of respect about your video project is, although we come from different political backgrounds, that you really are thinking through this project of liberation and not just being content with being a cheerleader with sort of statements of solidarity, but with being like how do we bring that resistance here to the United States context, and what does that mean, and thinking through these different problems. But I'd also like to ask a few questions related to What Do. So what's really interesting with What Do is you talk a little bit about some of your personal, like a fascinating personal dimension to it. Like you describe going to demonstrations in the West Bank and like sort of some limitations you saw related to that. Would you be willing to expand or elaborate on sort of your experience in the West Bank or in these demonstrations and your general thoughts on sort of anti-Zionism within the Zionist entity?
Oh yeah. Ooh, that's a whole can of worms. But we can go there if you want to. We can go there. I go there in the video, obviously. So it's just kind of a world that I left behind me, at least for now. It's where I was politically educated, basically. It's where I was raised politically in the space of like the protests against the wall, the apartheid wall, and the attempt at a joint struggle where Jews and internationals would come and support Jews and internationals and international Jews would come and support like the Palestinian popular struggle. And I need to one day like write a nonfiction sort of book about this to really dig into how like traumatizing and insane that period of my life was. And you can see it if you follow accounts of like people who are there. There's like Andre X, but he reached out to me on Twitter and he's huge on Instagram. He has like hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram and TikTok. And he was like, I love your work. I want to help you get it out on like Instagram. And here's what you need to do. And he like told me what I need to do to start getting it out there on Instagram. So that was super helpful, because there are people who are on Instagram who are not on YouTube apparently, or like who are on YouTube occasionally. But so he sort of challenged me to like try to make some short form content, and that's what I've been trying to do in the past couple of months, a little bit, with some success. So that's cool. Even though my heart isn't there, my heart is in the sort of long form video essays. So we'll see how whether I keep trying to pursue that going forward. But you can see his content is like just these insane, brutal videos of like his experiences of like coming and basically being a frontliner with Palestinian communities who are facing ethnic cleansing and like the brutality of Zionist occupation on the everyday. And it's been like this for a very long time, and it's accelerated dramatically since October 7. It's been like just gradually rising over the years, like the brutality that these Palestinians of a social strata that is rural, that still lives in like an indigenous agrarian lifestyle. I mean, like a different indigenous lifestyle, like a very agrarian lifestyle. And yeah, I mean that's the world I was educated into. Sort of, you have to go out there every day and risk your life because people are desperate and no one else is out there with them to like try to defend without weapons from the brutality of the occupation and the settlers who are a different aspect of the occupation, than its sanctioned military and police and other agencies. In this kind of lifestyle, you very seldom stop to like reflect and strategize and ask yourself, okay, is this working? Like I'm doing this every fucking day because I have no other choice because people are desperate for this support, but like it's only getting worse. I'm risking my life, risking my freedom. I'm getting traumatized. Like, can I, if it's not gonna work, what is gonna work? And unfortunately, I think I don't know if it's I don't know why exactly. Like, that's the job of like sociologists and anthropologists to try to figure it out. But unfortunately, this aspect of like the very radical like fringe Israeli left hasn't grown over the years. It hasn't exactly shrunk either. It's weird. It's like people definitely leave. There's a lot of burnout, but there are new generations of people like Andre and others who are like coming into this kind of work and into this kind of lifestyle. And I just hope that they survive because the violence is getting so much worse. But they're not part of like a growth trajectory that is working towards Palestinian liberation. It's like it's separate from a Palestinian resistance that is thinking in terms of a winnable strategy. There's an aspect of it that feels almost like insane high octane humanitarian work, if that makes any sense. Part of that is also the sort of the decline of the Palestinian popular struggle too. Like it doesn't make sense anymore for Palestinians living in Nabi Saleh. Nabi Saleh is it's a huge long story. Maybe I don't have to get into like micro histories, but a village where there's like a tradition of resistance and lots of like very politically educated organizers who would like protest weekly against the wall and against the annexation of their lands. And some of them like have like connections in Ramallah. Like they're not as isolated as like those very rural communities like in Masafir Yatta. And it stopped making sense for them to like keep going out and like have snipers like shoot off their legs, when the violence started escalating. So there's less and less space for any form of unarmed resistance.
So you described some limitations within sort of this. I think you said it was like extreme humanitarian sort of perspective of the anti-Zionist left within sort of the entity, and that there are limitations that come with it that it doesn't really think through resistance. So how did you make that jump from sort of this limited humanitarian viewpoint to sort of understanding and deeply studying the Palestinian resistance?
Um, well, I decided to migrate. Yeah, I was like, I'm probably gonna die if I keep doing this. Like, um, and and so I decided to the first chance that I had, I got a scholarship and left the country. And so that gave me perspective. I started getting involved in political struggles where I was living, and then every time I'd come back to Palestine to like visit, I would bring what I was learning abroad. But then I just started coming back less and less frequently, and I haven't been back actually since before October 7. And so every time I'd come back and visit, it was always like there was always a tension. Like I was noticing that it didn't make sense to keep doing this, but people weren't really interested in stopping to reflect and to think about what else we could try. Or sometimes they would be and like would try something, but it never really solidified. And it seemed like it was just not, there were not enough avenues for me to, and and truly there are not enough avenues for Jews to actually cross the line and join the Palestinian resistance. You know, you can participate, you could at the time participate to an extent in the Palestinian popular struggle, but with the decline of the Palestinian popular struggle, those avenues are shutting down. So I think this is both a limitation of obviously it's first and foremost a limitation of the settler radical left, but it's also a limitation of the resistance to an extent, and that's a point I'm cautious to make because I'm not in a position to criticize. But if you look at like Algerian resistance, you see that it was always able to recruit among the settler population, or like at its strongest, it was able to recruit among the settler population. Like Fanon talks about this very clearly, and I cite it in my Fanon video, France Fanon versus Identity Politics. And Bassel El-Araj also arrived at this realization in his work that I also cite extensively in my videos in Gaza's the Compass and in the Gaza Ghetto Uprising, that he stops looking at the conflict in terms of a simplistic duality of identity, of like Arabs and Jews, and that he has abandoned this duality and instead understands the world in terms of, he quotes Ali Shariati, and in terms of Frantz Fanon's understanding of the world as separated to a liberation camp and an oppressed camp. It's not exactly how he puts it. Typically, I always have it memorized, this specific line from him, because it's a line that I found actually in his book. I actually have a copy of it right here in front of my face, but it's called وجدت أجوبتي هكذا تكلم الشهيد باسل العرج. So this is one of my points of pride, is like I think I'm the first person to like bring this quotation into the English language, and the essay version of the Gaza Ghetto Uprising and the Brooklyn Rail, but it's also in the video essay. It's I no longer see this as a conflict between Arabs and Jews, between Israeli and Palestinian. I have abandoned this duality, this naive oversimplification of the conflict. I have become convinced of Ali Shariati and Frantz Fanon's divisions of the world into a colonial camp and a liberation camp. In each of the two camps, you will find people of all religions, languages, races, ethnicities, colors, and classes. In this conflict, for example, you will find people of our own skin standing rudely in the other camp, and at the same time, you will find Jews standing in our camp. Right. So this is something he was able to observe, basically, I think, based on his experience in the popular struggle. But it's nothing. But you won't find space for it in social media discourse of Palestine. Right. A lot of people would think of this as like, or like I think what he calls the naive version would think that any Jew who joins the Palestinian resistance is normalization. But I would argue that beyond the other ways where this is problematic, it's unstrategic. And like if you look at other liberation struggles, if you look at successful liberation struggles, they were able and made a lot of use by recruiting from the settler population. But that's a different conversation.
I'm really interested in this movement you came from, sort of the anti-Zionist movement within sort of the Zionist entity. So you said it wasn't shrinking, but that it was rather sort of maintaining a fairly small grouping. I remember there was an interview Abby Martin did with sort of an anti-Zionist activist in the entity, and sort of the activist was describing, maybe like a couple hundred staunch anti-Zionists within the entity, and that it just was a very isolating experience where everyone around them sort of post October 7th had turned into sort of genocidal maniacs. Would you sort of agree or with that assessment where it's like maybe just a couple hundred? And was it also like, I mean, you described it before, but like the isolation of that experience?
Yeah. So wait, so just so I understand the question is like, would you agree that Israeli society as a whole just turned into genocidal maniacs after October 7?
Yes, and would you say like maybe the number of committed anti-Zionists within sort of Israeli society is like
200 people.
a couple hundred? Yeah, like a couple hundred
Yeah,
maximum.
yeah. I agree that Israeli society is a society of like is an just completely insane, completely deranged, and it's my observation too that people that I was there were some people who surprised me after October and who I thought would be on the right side and who like were not. Like it revealed people who I thought like had some humanity in them as like genocidal maniacs and committed people who are active. Yeah, it's a handful of people. They rely on the people who you see like in protests or who you see on social media or whatever. They have a support network that's probably a little bit more than 200 people. They're a tip of a very small iceberg. Iceberg is what I would say basically. Is it completely negligible as a population, as a political bloc? In sociological terms, maybe, but it's not completely negligible in terms of their ability to impact the discourse. Like they have an outsized impact discursively than their numbers as a population, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And so, talking a little bit about the Gaza Ghetto uprising. So, you've presented a very interesting discussion of military theory of this sort of like technological fetishist view in sort of the Israeli military that sort of emphasizes technology and surveillance versus the more nuanced version of counterinsurgency. So, I think it's Coin.
Yeah,
What
that's
was
right.
the
No, Coin versus RMA, the Revolutionary Military Affairs. Yeah.
Yes, RMA. So my question to you is sort of in the over a year or so since publishing the Gaza Ghetto Uprising, do you think your thesis on these two military theories, how sort of the Israeli military has sort of abandoned coin, after Oslo, which was, very good application of counterinsurgency, where they separated the resistance from the population by installing, puppets through the PA, and that they've abandoned that completely in favor of, the other approach, which is, just flat out repression, violence, surveillance. Do you think that's held up since publishing the essay? And do you think that this paradigm has also applied in a way to the latest war of aggression against Iran, where sort of the US and Israel believed that, by decapitating, by launching missiles, by removing Iranian leadership, they could sort of have a war that would be very quick and wouldn't have to rely on like putting boots on the ground.
Yeah, excellent question. Yeah, so in the aftermath of publishing the Gaza Ghetto Uprising, there was a strategic vacuum. The main military strategy until then, like Israeli state strategy, had collapsed. And I obviously I discussed that in the Gaza Ghetto Uprising. And then there was a moment where it seemed like maybe counterinsurgency could fill the void as a military doctrine. Like it was the Biden administration, and they had their people in the Israeli war rooms, which is something that had never happened in Israel beforehand, by the way. So that's when people are saying that Israel is actually controlling the U.S. It's just total complete nonsense. It's like no, actually, when Israel was under an existential threat, like the grown-ups took over. Like they sat in the Israeli war room and they were dictating strategy very early on, and they were ready to take over. Eventually, they decided to hand back autonomy to their outpost, which is the state of Israel. And so since GGU, we've definitely seen sort of the consolidation of like RMA derivatives, like derivatives of RMA as a doctrine that are setting the tone and prioritizing techno-fetishism, tech superiority over strategic thinking in terms of how to actually achieve their goals. And also their goals have clarified as like more exterminationist than survivalist, if you know what I mean. Like Coin is exterminationist in as much as that is strategic, whereas RMA doesn't think about that very much. RMA leaves room for people who are exterminationists for the sake of it to set the tone, and that's what's been happening. So this has its pros and cons from a resistance perspective. It's like you have a less competent adversary, but your adversary is also like a loose cannon and really dangerous and could like possibly end the world in the process of trying to carry out its like messianic exterminationist goals. So really a dangerous stage for the world, for humanity as a species. But there are openings for revolutionaries within this crisis, right? And we're seeing this doctrine in Iran. We're seeing weapons industry trying to like win big economically while like putting the world on the brink of like World War III without a strategic idea of how to actually achieve their goals, which in this case are right the regime replacement in Iran. But yeah, that in itself is a different question too. Good question though, and it's good for me to think about that, to reassess those sort of early conjectures.
Yeah, and sort of looking at Israel's military actions in the regions, it seems like RMA was pretty successful for the first portion of their sort of genocidal response to October 7th. I mean, like they were successful in terms of like toppling the Syrian government, so they were successful in toppling that. Their pager operation was successful in terms of like really limiting Hezbollah's capabilities in terms of the military. It was, they successfully committed a genocide in Gaza for a number of years. But it seems like RMA has shown its limitations really specifically with the operation against Iran, where they aren't able to take on a state that has like a military capabilities that's industrialized, that has the powers that a state has, and that we're seeing that play out now with sort of Iran really being able to hit back with blockading the Strait of Hormuz and really plunging the United States and maybe even the world into an economic recession. Would you agree with like that assessment where like Israel using RMA was able to secure a number of victories, specifically against Syria, specifically against Hezbollah, but that it really hit its limitations on the rocks of Iran, and that it wasn't really even all that successful because Hezbollah has really reactivated, and now Israel is commencing a land invasion of Lebanon in the south?
Yeah, it's a really interesting hypothesis, and I would definitely read that paper. But I don't think it holds for Syria, because I think what happened in Syria was actually empire reaping the success of counterinsurgency policy in Syria rather than RMA. And that actually Syria demonstrates why counterinsurgency is more effective as a military doctrine than RMA, because counterinsurgency doesn't rely on tech superiority as much as like human, like as much as like actual armies, like with people who you make do what you want as like an imperial force. Yeah, so that's what we saw, right? We saw forces like armed and sanctioned, like post like ex Al Qaeda forces, or maybe post is a better word actually, post Al Qaeda forces. Consolidating, collaborating with foreign armies of mercenaries to take over the local population and exploit divisions within the host nation, right? And so here I'm using terms from the counterinsurgency field manual, FM 3-24, and like appoint basically these proxy forces as their own government, and that's what we're seeing in Syria today. Yeah, and they literally admit that. So it's a little like Trump is has officially taken credit for like appointing Ahmed al-Shara as the head of Syria, but it's not entirely his credit to claim. This has been true long before Trump, or at least long before the second administration. The complicity of of these forces with U.S. empire and NATO and Turkey. Yeah, but that's sort of a separate conversation. So that would be my sort of my contention with Iran. However, yeah, absolutely, like yeah. And in Lebanon too. Israel tried to go for what could be seen as more of a counterinsurgency strategy back in the 90s in Lebanon with the South Lebanon Army, the SLA, which was a Zionist army of Lebanese collaborators with Zionism. But they decided to dismantle it when they retreated from South Lebanon and under the administration of Ehud Barak in 2000. And yeah, and all of those collaborators are now got fucked, basically. A lot of them got fucked. Some of them live as second-class citizens and like under in the so-called state of Israel.
No, I enjoy you pushing back a little bit on my ideas. I was just like formulating them on the fly.
Word, no, I appreciate that. Sorry if I'm talking too much,
No, it's great. But it's also interesting to see in terms of Iran. Like, I think what Trump and Israel were trying to do, or the U.S. and Israel, because it's not just Trump, was like they were trying to do a little mix of both coin and RMA, where like they were telling the Iranian people to rise up. They were taking advantage of unrest among the population, and I'm sure some of the unrest was definitely fermented by Israel. Like I've heard like reports or rumors that Mossad was like playing a little bit of a role in the protest, but I don't doubt that definitely Iranians have legitimate economic grievances with the sanctions the United States has put on there. But it seems like the United States and Israel were hoping that after launching these missiles and decapitating Iranian state leadership, that that counterinsurgency could commence with sort of unrest leading to a toppling of the Iranian government. But it seems like that just hasn't played out at all. From what I'm seeing, it seems like the Iranian people have mostly united post the war commencing, and that sort of the internal unrest has mostly quieted down. So like now they're just left with bombings and missiles, which isn't going to really, I think, work out in the United States and Israel's favor.
Yeah. No, they acted with hubris. They were drunk on their success in Syria, and they completely fucked themselves over in Iran by going all out, basically completely losing their internal network within Iran, and now just going full kinetic with very grim prospects looking ahead. So a lot of people put people in like the adversary, basically like U.S. Israel has put decades of work into building the network that they activated in Iran before starting this all-out war, and it's probably completely routed. They're fucked. I mean, and yeah, I mean, it's too early to say, like who knows what happens with like the firepower that the West can muster. But they seem like they overplayed their cards, and that they're really fucked in Iran, and a lot of people are going to lose their jobs or like lose their careers because of this.
So I'm really interested in your thoughts on this. So you mentioned before that really it's the United States that has the leash on Israel, pushing back against, tropes of like that Israel is the one that controls the United States. But sort of from what I'm seeing is that like it really seems like Netanyahu is the one who dragged Trump into a war of aggression against Iran. You had Marco Rubio sort of making that off the cuff statement being like, oh, Israel said they were going to attack Iran with or without the United States. And sort of we assessed that, if they did, Iran would strike back. And so we just decided to strike with Israel, sort of launching this, war of choice, this war of aggression, really being dragged by Netanyahu into this act of aggression. Do you sort of buy the sort of common perception that Israel is the one that dragged the United States into this war? Or do you sort of think that explanation is a bit overblown and that the United States already wanted war with Iran, and that, the Trump regime already, wanted this aggression, and that, it's just a convenient way to scapegoat Israel for a war that the United States already wanted?
I think that's a convenient narrative for the Trump administration, which is why I doubt it. I mean, it's one of the reasons for which I doubt it. It's true that war on Iran has been a career goal for Netanyahu, and so he's been trying to get the U.S. to like lead the charge on Iran for a very long time. He's not the only one, by the way. Like his rivals have also had their targets on Iran and have done military operations in Iran, and so it's not only Netanyahu, but maybe that's not entirely relevant. And yeah, what I would say is that this is a Trump decision. To suggest that Israel can force the U.S. to do anything it's magical thinking. It's like, yes, like Israel is influential. Yes, the Israel lobby exists. Yes, it is also an influential arm of Zionism as a political force. No, it does not force the U.S. administrations into like existential battles, or like battles with existential consequences. I think once again, I'm cautious. Like I'm not a fucking talking head media commentator. I try to say what I say based on like actual research, and typically the stuff isn't available to me right now. Like it's like we're speaking as this is unfolding. By the time, it's changing as we're speaking. By the time we'll post it, it will change some more. So it's hard within the fog of war to understand what exactly is happening, who exactly is behind the scenes, what are the exact motivations. From my vantage point, with a very limited access that we have as people who don't sit and behind these closed doors, it seems like Trump is just continuing this kinetic rampage through the world as a distraction from the Epstein files. It might sound too simplistic an explanation. It probably is. There are obviously other interests. There are very important economic interests. The U.S. would definitely want to control like oil in Iran and the strategic control over the Straits of Hormuz. In the same way that the U.S. wants to control 20% of the world's oil in Venezuela, but to embark on such a like militarily deficient campaign, at least that's how it looks like right now, takes more than like it's more than just those interests. It's like it's this hubris that I was talking about earlier, and also the sense that Trump shares with Netanyahu, that you have to stay kinetic because of like the very personal legal risks that you're facing if you lose power.
I've seen some interpretation of sort of this recent war of aggression against Iran as sort of a vindication of sort of Sinwar and Hamas's thesis in launching October 7th, and that, the hope with Al-Aqsa flood was that it would lead to a wider regional war that would sort of end the process of normalization with the Zionist entity, and that would force, the axis of resistance to take action and sort of stop the slow strangling of Palestine. Do you think that this war has shown that sort of the hope with October 7th came to fruition? I don't know. What are your thoughts on the idea that Sinwar's hope with Al-Aqsa flood sort of has come to fruition with sort of this expansion into really a regional war with Iran striking military bases of the United States throughout the region?
I would say that what we're seeing in front of our very eyes definitely vindicates Sinwar's strategic understanding of what's happening. And by the way, one of the things he said after October 7 is like, the Zionist enemy is defeated. We're now facing the real enemy, the US and the UK, or like the US and Europe, which is also something that people forget with all of their tanky Semitic conspiracy theories. Sorry.
No, it's fine.
But yeah, I think Sinwar is vindicated.
All right. So before we touch on your research on anti-ICE and the uprising against ICE in Minnesota, as well as the Prairieland case, I'd love to touch some controversial questions, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on them. So there's this YouTuber, I don't know if you've heard of him, named Bad Empanada.
Oh shit.
And sort of a big message he tries to put out in a lot of his videos is, he argues very much against this idea of Jewish exceptionalism. He argues that, rather than focusing on sort of Jewish anti-Zionism, we should push a more universalist approach against Zionism, that, by focusing very special attention on sort of anti-Zionist Jewish voices, we are sort of leaning into this idea that Zionists themselves push, that, Jewish people are special, that Jewish people are, somehow magical, and that instead we should focus more on the idea that, it doesn't matter whether or not you're Jewish, what Israel is doing, settler colonialism, genocide, ethnic cleansing is wrong, and that we shouldn't focus on specifically on Jewish anti-Zionists, but we should just focus on a universalist anti-Zionism as a whole. And I know you had some disagreements. I saw on Twitter you had some personal like back and forth with him, but what are your thoughts on his thesis idea against Jewish exceptionalism, and would you agree or would you want to push back on that idea?
Oh shit. Well, you see, Bad Empanada is my homeboy. I'm not going to talk shit about Bad Empanada. And I haven't watched that video that you're talking about. Anything that I see, sort of, I just don't want to, because he's my homeboy. I don't want to fuck up my perception of him. So I'm sure it's good. I'm sure it has some things I might disagree with too, because I don't know. I just know a lot about that shit. So even just like scholarly shit, like Judaic studies, I really went down the rabbit hole with Judaic studies, and I have a film called a video essay called Anti-Semitism Weaponized that goes down there, that like the rabbit hole of Judaic studies, and my sense is people haven't watched it and they keep saying dumb shit on Twitter, but not Bad Empanada. Bad Empanada is my homeboy. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure what you're referring to in terms of the Twitter exchange.
But I believe the exchange was something like, Bad Empanada put forward his thesis that, we shouldn't have a special focus on Jewish anti-Zionism because it leans into, a Zionist narrative that Jewish people are special. And I believe your response was, like that Jewish anti-Zionism is necessary to dismantle that Zionist narrative. I don't know if you remember that. If not, we just move on.
Yeah. No, I don't remember that, but And I don't think I would say that. So it must be something a little different.
Okay.
But I don't think Jewish anti-Zionism is necessary.
Mhm.
Like, I think resistance is necessary. Palestinian resistance is what's necessary. But as I said earlier in this conversation, there is a strategic advantage to recruiting Jewish anti-Zionists to the Palestinian resistance. And so any other argument derives from this strategic understanding that is based on a deep dive into Fanon's work as a leader in the FLN in Algeria. So yeah, hopefully that answers. And shout out to Baden Panada, he holds it down.
I remember you were shouted out by him and his content nuke against Ethan Klein. Like you had a shout out like an hour into his content nuke.
Cool, yeah. Hopefully he hears my shout out too. He just went to Cuba. Shout out to him.
Oh yeah, I'm excited to see the full documentary of his drop on his main channel in maybe in a few weeks.
Yeah.
But moving on from foreign policy and sort of this foreign barbarism and looking a bit more at, US domestic barbarism. You mentioned and you published a short. Funnily enough, you're talking about making making shorts and reels earlier in the interview, but you published a short talking about the Prairieland case and how you were reached out for comment by a reporter from Mother Jones, and like how your essay, The Gaza Ghetto Uprising, was used as evidence of ideological, I think it was ideological subversion from the defendants in that case. Could you talk a little bit about the Prairieland case, your connection to it, and sort of what it means domestically for any radicals or anyone who wants to fight against specifically ICE?
Yeah, definitely. So the Prairieland case, it's so crazy and fucked up. So about 12 people on July 4th, 2025, held a noise demo outside of an ICE detention facility in Prairieland, like in Texas. And noise demos is not a radical thing. Like it's a tradition to do this on July 4th. It's a tradition to do this on New Year's Eve. People do this all over the country. Sometimes, especially on July 4th, they would light fireworks. Hundreds of millions of Americans, I think, light fireworks on July 4th. Sometimes people do some graffiti. Apparently, some of that happened outside of the Prairieland Detention Center. By the way, this was while Liqa Kurdiya, the Palestinian activist from East Jerusalem, who was arrested at Columbia University. She was just released, but at the time she had been detained. I think she was detained for over a year, and she was at Prairieland at the time. So they were also protesting for her and for all other people held at the detention facility, just to like support these people who are like abandoned by everyone, prisoners, people who have been kidnapped, to raise their spirits a little bit by like making noise outside of the prison. The problem is they did this in Texas probably at a place where they don't see very many protests. And so from my understanding of looking at the case pretty carefully I was aware of it. I'd been aware of it beforehand, but I started looking at it more carefully when I was contacted by this, as you mentioned, this Mother Jones journalist about my essay somehow being presented in court. But from my understanding of what happened, there was an out of control cop who, by himself, I think, came out and started shooting at this protest, and they scattered and dispersed. But one protester was armed, and this is Texas, okay? A lot of people have weapons. A lot of people have weapons in general in the U.S. Right, there's a Second Amendment here, but in Texas specifically, Texas law gives more guarantees for self-defense than other states, and you're allowed to shoot back at police. There's the self-defense clause that in court, by the way, from my understanding, the judge overruled the self-defense argument and didn't allow the self-defense argument to be made in court. So that's also maybe grounds for an appeal. But I'm jumping the gun here, pun not intended. Yeah. So one protester shot, who's, by the way, his name is Benjamin Song. He's an ex-Marine. He shot suppressed fire at the ground, basically to save people's lives, to keep the cop away. I don't know what happened, whether this forced a retreat. But my understanding is he's an ex-Marine. If he wanted to kill the cop, he would have killed the cop. And he shot suppressed fire at the ground. And from what I hear, from the coverage I read, Benjamin Song's lawyer presented body cam footage that shows suppressed fire being shot at the ground. But the prosecution argued that he shot at this cop, and that the cop was grazed by a bullet. But they didn't show any medical record of an injury. So basically, I think these people are being. It's more than 12 people. It's actually 19 people who are being prosecuted because the state is trying to argue that it's like a terrorist Antifa cell that held this protest and is trying to like manufacture some kind of terrorist network in Texas, or like this terrorist cell, in order to fuck all of these people over for their entire lives. And that's what we're facing right now. Even though these people did absolutely nothing. Like maybe they lit fireworks and graffitied. Maybe, one of them or two of them lit fireworks and one of them or two of them did some graffiti. But for 19 people to get decades is nuts. And it's a terrible precedent that comes after a lot of failed cases like this. Like this is something Trump has been trying to do throughout his time in office from the very first fucking day, which was January 2017, right? When there were like riots during his inauguration, and they kettled 200 people and like arrested 200 people and tried to prosecute them all on charges that are worth decades in prison. But that case completely collapsed and no one did any time. And then they tried this again after the Stop Cop City movement. I discussed this in my videos a little bit, and tried to prosecute 60 people on RICO and domestic terrorism charges, some of them on domestic terrorism, most of them on RICO charges, which is like a law that tries to prosecute like the mob, basically, that was designed to prosecute the mob. And that fell too. But with this case succeeding, at least for now, we'll see what happens after the appeal, and inshallah there will be an appeal. And like we need to do everything in our power to make this appeal work, because if it works, like then there's a precedent to prosecuting anti-ICE protesters and people protesting for prisoners as terrorists, like, so the entire anti-ICE movement ecosystem needs to step up. The entire pro-Palestine movement ecosystem needs to step up and to make sure the appeal succeeds, because we just can't let this happen. And they fucking didn't do it. They didn't commit any crimes. Like even according to Texas law, it's not a crime to shoot back at a cop who's trying to murder you. So I think there are many reasons to appeal. I think there are lots of irregularities in how this trial was held. I think there's evidence that top U.S. officials interfered in appointing the judge and selecting the judge, and in having the Judge Pittman intimidate the jury. And I'm not saying that this is true. I'm saying that this needs to be looked into, and that's the work of like investigative journalists to do. And I think some people are on that. That's what I know from like following the social media of the support committee. And I definitely recommend everyone listening to follow their social media. Their website is called prairielanddefendants.com. And there's the social media of Fire Ant Movement Defense that I definitely recommend people follow to see what's up. I know that they're calling for, I think just today they put out a call for a day of solidarity on April 4th, so people can organize like letter writing events, noise demos of their own. It's still not illegal to make noise demos in this country, and people should like exercise their constitutional rights and support these people and make sure that they're granted a fair trial.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And like I think one of the most appalling things I read when like looking to the reporting on this case is I believe the prosecution was arguing that, they were this, Antifa domestic terrorist cell using evidence like, they came in black bloc and that they used signal chats. And it's like that's just like standard practice, standard OPSEC for like anyone going to like a demonstration, where it's like, you try not to wear identifiable clothing and you try, you communicate securely. And like the fact that just basic operational security is being criminalized now as like terrorist tactics is ridiculous, and it's a threat like everywhere to like anyone in the United States who wants to present domestic opposition to the Trump regime.
Exactly. Yeah, there's so much more that we can say about this. I'm happy to say more if we want to go wild and say the things that no one will dare say on other podcasts. But I'm not saying anything illegal. So please put this on YouTube so people hear it. But all these people who are like idolizing the Black Panther Party and talking about like the self-defense, tours, that what do you think Huey Newton would do if out of control cops would start shooting at protesters in Oakland in the 60s or 70s? So if you're talking about the Black Panther Party, you need to talk about the Prairieland case and there's no reason to be afraid. You have constitutional protections. All of the fucking influencers who are keeping their mouths zipped about this, there's no reason. Like, the Intercept is talking about, CNN is talking about it. Just like, help raise awareness, for Christ's sake. We're not like, or the people who are like facing these charges are not asking for much. And so if you can help raise awareness, help raise awareness. If you can write to support people, that kind of stuff, that's what prevents people from snitching, basically. Like, when they feel like there's a movement that upholds them. Part of the issue, right, is that part of the disaster of this case is that people had little connection to each other. They didn't think they were going to do something that out of the ordinary, and suddenly they found themselves, like, maybe people who weren't even there, right? Because many of them weren't even there, suddenly find themselves being accused of terrorism and being tortured and being coerced to sign plea deals, and finding themselves testifying and upholding the state's completely fabricated narrative in court, right? So there are some cooperating defendants who, I believe, were forced to sign pleas under duress, I think their plea deals should be illegal, actually. Like, they were held in isolation for 90 days, so for months. And the UN definition, the UN classifies being held in isolation for more than 15 days as torture. So they were tortured according to UN, and then they signed plea deals. So those plea deals should be like illegal by international law and unconstitutional by US law, like plea deals signed under duress. So their whole testimony needs to be discredited. And I hope to God that the prosecution is trying to make an argument like this to make sure this is retried. But yeah, writing support letters so people know that they're not alone, holding their own protests, talking about this at the No Kings rallies that are coming up, right? March 28th, that's when the social movement, like, millions of people hit the streets, like, going on a PA system and talking about the Prairieland case. Like, do that. Anyone can do it. It's these protests are super open. You can go to the organizers. You can bring your own megaphone. You can go with a couple of friends. Say, I just want to say some words on the PA system about the Prairieland case. You can make up some organization that you're working with, or maybe it's not even made up. Here we can just announce it. The Prairieland Support Intergalactic Network, and claim that you're their representative, and help these people who are now facing decades in prison, and help turn around this ruling that could be used against you and your friends wherever you are in the US.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that's my high horse.
No, yeah, I absolutely agree. Like, just once again, like, just utterly, like, such an appalling decision. Like, the fact that they're just criminalizing wearing black to a demonstration or using Signal. Anyone who has, like, ever attended a demonstration knows that's just basic, like, what everyone does. And so, like, the fact that that's now defined as, like, terrorism, that can now be used in when prosecuting you, the fact that they've been torturing defendants, forcing them into plea deals, like, just all the details are just utterly appalling. And nothing but hope that they get retried and let off, and not get whatever the state is trying to hammer down on them.
Can I say one more thing about this?
Yeah, of course.
Cool. Yeah. So it's not using Signal per se, because the fucking government uses Signal, as we found out. Like, everyone is using Signal right now. Anyone who has any pretense to use, like, encrypted communication uses Signal app. But they're specifically criminalizing Dario Sanchez. His trial, I think, is a state trial. I'm not sure, but I think it's a state trial, and it starts on April 20th. And he's accused. His only accusation is of removing an arrested person's phone from a Signal chat. That's the crime here. And they think this, it's not a crime, obviously, but once again, like, yeah, got to pay attention to his trial, got to make sure he doesn't get incriminated, because, once again, the precedent here can have terrible consequences on people all over the country.
But moving and looking at like other examples of anti-ICE sort of uprisings, anti-ICE resistance, you went to Minneapolis and Minnesota, and you've written a little bit and published a little bit about your findings there on social media. So how did you come about this trip? What were your findings, and what did you sort of learn by being on the ground at Minnesota, especially during the time when there was just a flood of ICE agents and national tension at the city?
Mm-hmm. So what I saw in Minneapolis was unlike anything I've seen in this country and all my years of like organizing or activism, whatever you want to call it here. It was, what's the term in Russian? Dvoyevlastye, the right from Lenin, dual power. Like it was really a situation in which the civilian population, the in which the social movement was building parallel structures that were challenging state power in a real way. Like just extremely impressive, like very intricate, very resilient networks that enabled people to like actually track ICE operations and disrupt them at the moment of abduction, like at the moment of abduction attempt. And I saw with my very eyes abduction attempts being shut down by people coming out, like organizing to with this counter surveillance apparatus that has basically emerged in Minneapolis, and then coming out, calling for neighbors to like get out of their houses and yell at ICE, creating the sense that ICE was being surrounded, and then they would just leave basically, rather than risk escalation from a populace that is potentially armed. And that's like an intervention that I made with this video that is still kind of seems to be like going pretty hard on Instagram. Not insanely hard, but like I don't know, hundreds of thousands of views. So for me, it's reached beyond my sort of immediate circle or my own echo chamber. And yeah, so the claim is that, well, you can go watch it because I'll repeat it, but I probably say it more succinctly in that video. But yeah, basically on January 14th, there was an attempted abduction, and ICE wound up shooting someone in the leg, I think, through a door. I'm not sure exactly, and I think there are conflicting accounts. But what happened after that was that this was in North Minneapolis, so very proletarian population with a tradition of fighting police, and they responded the same way that they would to a police shooting there. So these are like the veterans of the George Floyd uprising, which obviously like went insanely hard in Minneapolis in 2020. Uh, and what happened was that this population came in confluence with the anti-ICE resistance that started building its apparatus up after the murder of Renee Good, which was, I think, January 7th. I may be getting my dates slightly wrong, so double check me on that. But so very quickly, what happens when they shoot at someone is that they create a crime scene that then pins them to the spot, so they can't like quickly retreat. So both the neighborhood and the rapid response network showed up and create a spectacle of legitimate protest, or a spectacle of protest. And so we saw people who are like nonviolence practitioners who are part of this rapid response network, with people from the neighborhood who are like veterans of a fighting movement. Some of them armed, some of them flashing their weapons, like lifting their shirts and saying like, "If you shoot, I shoot." That's my understanding from my research. And so ICE was forced to retreat. It's not only the weapons. People were also, from my understanding, were also like throwing bricks at them, which totally disoriented them. And there were also fireworks there too. And so ICE retreated. And that was the night where we saw footage of like people looting ICE vehicles and like taking their weapons. So basically expropriating ICE vehicles and confiscating the weapons that they used to terrorize the local population. And then somehow the movement sort of, as it tends to do, and I really recommend watching How It Might Should Be Done or reading the essay published on Ill Will by Idris Robinson to see how this repeats throughout uprisings. And Idris had this brilliant analysis in 2020 when shit was going down, was capable of noticing that already the liberal apparatus was denying that militant resistance was happening, or as he says, that a militant nationwide uprising did in fact occur. And so we haven't seen this analysis being made at all, that there was also this kind of this very militant wing of the movement that changed ICE's rules of engagement and made it such that they can't tell the difference between nerdy grad students who are doing some patrolling in the rapid response network during a lunch break and actual like proletarians from the hood who are coming out to face them armed Both are yelling at them to leave. And so I think we've seen a significant decline in successful abduction attempts in Minneapolis since then. And that's substantiated by some of the data that I cite in that very short video. And then also just generally, like I had this beautiful experience of walking through a city in arms, like a city that is actually resisting. So I had like flashbacks to Palestine, to like what it feels like to actually be in a place that has a culture of resistance, where every single business you walk into, you can be fairly certain that if you're like running away from like a violent foreign occupier trying to arrest you, or worse, that they will hide you, that they will take the risk of doing that and help you get away and give you free food and free tea. That's more in Palestine. I didn't get a lot of free tea in Minneapolis, but I did get a lot of free food from people who were just like, "Oh, you came from out of town to support? Hell yeah! Here's a fucking meal for you. You want to pay for that? No, we're not going to let you. We're not going to take your money." Like I literally had that experience multiple times. So that was beautiful. I hope this is still happening in Minneapolis. I hope this can happen in other cities too. And so I would really encourage people to study the Minneapolis model, and maybe I'll make a more sort of long form, in depth piece about that. But in the meantime, I have some writing about this on my Substack and these short videos that you can find on YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter.
No, yeah, I really found the analysis to be really interesting and like thought provoking, because like once again, most of what we hear in like obviously like bourgeois mainstream media is, if there is violence, it's because of outside agitators, the outside agitator narrative that was used throughout the pro-Palestine encampment student movement. People be like, oh, if there's any sort of violence or these movements themselves, they're not grassroots, they're just brought in by outside agitators. And I think in 2020 specifically, the the scapegoat was white anarchists. Whereas if these protests in 2020 were violent, it was because outside agitators who were white anarchists were causing them to be violent, as if black proletarians had no reason to be angry against the police in 2020.
Absolutely, and as if white proletarians have no reason to be angry at police. Like both. That's part of. I mean, that's part of like the logic of the counterinsurgency, is to try to separate people, as if people from out of town don't have reasons to be angry at the police. Like, of course they do. And I think that's what was refreshing to me in Minneapolis in those first days of Operation Metro Surge, is that everyone knew I was coming from out of town to support, and no one was like, "Oh, what are you trying to come here to agitate or whatever?" Which is something that people would do to you, in other cities, even in the place where you live. People like the peace police would be like, by peace police I mean like people from the social movement apparatus who try to crack down on any kind of militant activity or any kind of militant slogan or any kind of militancy at all. They would try to imply that you're an outsider, and if you have an accent like I do, they would weaponize that against you. Or you're not even from here. Like their xenophobia would come out. Like this has literally happened to me. So yeah, no, I think we fucking need outside agitators. Like if they're mobilizing their forces from all over the country and all over the world, even like I saw that ICE is recruiting former Israeli soldiers. I saw like ICE is putting ads in Tel Aviv because they have such a terrible have such a terrible shortage, and people who like want to work their loser overpaid jobs. And yeah, and if they're mobilizing people from all over the world, then we should be able to do that too. Like we should be able to get support to defend our neighbors from this fucking Gestapo. So we must never concede an inch to the outside agitator discourse. It's purely counterinsurgency discourse.
Oh yeah, 100% agree. But something I find really compelling about your content, and the reason I really was so hypnotized and entranced, I think, both by Gaza Ghetto Uprising and Gaza is the Compass, is it really takes the question of militant resistance seriously. I think especially among the Marxist and communist left, there's a dearth of study in military strategy in terms of like arms strategy, because I think among Marxists and communists, like there's an abstract notion that yes, a revolution is necessary. Yes, you cannot just peacefully transfer power from the bourgeois class to the proletariat class, but that this conviction remains mostly abstract. And like there's that famous Maoist quote that revolution is not a dinner party. Right. And I feel like a lot of Marxists on the left sort of believe that it will, or like believe, revolution is something that ought to happen somewhere else. It'll happen somewhere else first. Resistance is going to be something that happens somewhere else first, that we should just be cheerleaders, and that we don't really need to study, armed resistance or what resistance looks like elsewhere or how we can implement it, here in our own context. And so that's what I really appreciate about your work, is that you take this question of resistance seriously, and not just in this abstract way of one class replacing another, but looking at strategy from the Palestinian resistance and trying to understand it and make it a compass for how we can employ resistance here. And I think to do some fairness to the Marxist left, there's been some really good work. You mentioned Clausewitz in your Gaza Ghetto Uprising video, and like the duality between COIN and RMA. But I think Foreign Languages Press published a really good book. Foreign Languages Press is a sort of Marxist-Leninist Maoist publishing house based in France. Published a really interesting translation by this scholar T. Turbent, called Clausewitz and the People's War.
It says Clausewitz and the People's War and other political-military essays. Hell yeah. Wow, that looks dope.
I know it is. It's a very good read so far. But I think it's really reviving a conversation among the communist left about, like, by sort of not really deeply studying military strategy, we're really losing a key part of, what a lot of communists and revolutionaries at the time were looking at, right? Like, this book goes very deeply into how, Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, Mao sort of viewed and interacted with military strategy at their time, how they put it into practice. And I think, it's very necessary now more than ever for Marxists, communist leftists to take that question seriously. And I think your work is a good segue into having those conversations and really thinking that problem through, rather than, putting it off to the horizon. And, thinking about it now is necessary now more than ever, especially with barbarism on a world stage and barbarism domestically. So I just wanted to put that out there. And I think What Do is a really good introduction or primer of thinking through the problem of resistance, and not just being a cheerleader, but bringing it to, the context of the viewer.
Mm-hmm. Word. Yeah, I need to read this book. I just looked it up. I just found a copy right away. It's awesome that they make it available for free.
I know. It's Foreign Languages Press is pretty sick. Honestly, I ordered it online. It like ships pretty fast. It's like a week. But I just wanted to put that out there because that's what I really appreciate the most out of your work, even though we come from different political traditions. I think, having these conversations and thinking through these problems, regardless of, whatever ideological commitments, one has, is deeply important in an era of barbarism and chaos that we're seeing play out on the world stage.
Absolutely. I'm excited for your book report. I want to read it, or I want to watch that video.
No, I've been wanting to. So this is a fun fact. I don't know if I ever told you this. I mean, I might have. But like when I got banned for 5 days, I was like really reorganizing my thoughts and like my projections for the future. And I was like, oh, well, if I can't post on YouTube, what I would love to do instead is like a really long deep dive podcast project in like the history of the Palestinian resistance, sort of like, hours long, 10-hour long, multi-episode podcasts, just like detailing the history of, the Palestinian resistance. And then maybe when I run out of that, of like the history of the Qassam brigades, maybe moving on to like other examples of military resistance for liberation, like maybe a series on Haiti, maybe a series on all these things. Because I think military history, especially, and like the history of resistance, has been very underplayed in a lot of these spaces, and I think it's especially important to rectify that gap.
Yeah, please make that work. I'm excited for this trajectory for you, but unfortunately, you were reinstated. I'm joking. Yeah, no, your new work is great. I really loved the new Venezuela video. I just watched it yesterday. I loved it.
I wish I could have expanded a bit more, because there's so much more interesting things about Venezuela. Like I didn't touch up on the more like grassroots portion of Venezuelan democracy. Like there's a lot of anarchist adjacent writers who write a lot about like the more bottom up approaches that Venezuela had under Chavez, like the communes, the collectives, things like that. But I wasn't able to touch on that. And the video was like taking way too long. I was like, I just need to get this out and then move on to like a new project. I know. Speaking of new projects, what is in the works for you?
Oh God. Yeah. There's a few things. That I'm floating right now. So what, because What Do didn't didn't do half as well as the Gaza Ghetto Uprising. I'm trying to do some work to promote it, so I'm doing a couple of screenings, like in person. I was invited, so I'm going to travel a little bit. So I'm actually going to Texas, and I'm gonna screen it in Austin, and then I might go a little bit further in the Southwest, which I don't know very well, Southwest of this country, and I don't know. Yeah, I the other projects I need to figure out how I want to talk about them publicly. What because there's a risk in talking about them publicly that people will be disappointed if you don't get around to them or if it takes you a long time. But yeah, I have some. I don't know if that risk is a bad risk or whatever. I just haven't figured out because I haven't been doing this for very long of how to go about it. Whether I build hype for something that I haven't yet been able to make possible. Like how far how far in advance do I try to build hype for it, and what if I decide I want to do something else? So yeah, there's the problem is I still have so much to do about what do. Like I want to adapt it to written form. I wanted to get more of an audience. So there's also this aspect of it of like trying to cut it up into chunks into Instagrammable chunks. And then there's some new work. Like there's some notes I started taking for some new stuff. And then I also have my fucking job, which is its own thing. So I don't know. I'm figuring it out. I'll let you know though.
All right. Seems like we're not receiving any spoilers for your next project. Although I understand that. I understand that definitely. But thank you so much for this conversation. It was lovely to speak to you. I've always wanted to speak to you, get your thoughts, especially with like the ever-changing landscape of, US and Israeli imperialism. Well, really, it's U.S. imperialism with Israel as an extension of U.S. empire. But I was glad I was able to hear your thoughts on like the latest war of aggression against Iran, and we were able to talk a lot about domestic politics.
Mhm.
So thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, and same here. We should do this again sometime. This was really fun. Sometimes I try to do like interviews with people who I want to talk to. Who I have a good time talking to them. And I think that's a good rule. It's because that I think it's more important than like yeah. Anyway, that's its own question. I really appreciate the invitation and great to have a live conversation with you, and let's keep the conversation going. Okay, so this is where. Oh. Let's see if I can stop this echo. There we go. So this is where Spooky ended our conversation. And then he turned off the recording on his end, but I continued recording on my end, so you'll hear better sound. And this bit that I just wanted to keep for y'all, the last bonus bit of the conversation, here it goes.